hope my voice is audible and my screen is also visible. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Nimit Sharma, and I work as a quality engineering manager here at Adobe. I have been working with Adobe for almost 10 years now, and during my stint here at Adobe, I have worked on various Cold Fusion features like databases, ORM, PDFG service, WebSocket, API Manager, Cold Fusion Performance, and PMT. And today I will talk about PMT installation, configuration, and I'll also briefly touch PMT architecture. All right, so let's start with the webinar. So the agenda is I'll talk about PMT components, then installation. I'll also talk about important configuration files, and then we will see how we can onboard Cold Fusion servers on PMT. And once the basic stuff is out of the way, I'll talk about how the data flows in the system and what are the things that we need to keep in mind while configuring the PMT server. I will also cover the data archiving. Then finally, I will talk about the common issues that are faced by our customers. So these are the two basic building blocks of PMT. First is PMT server, which is undertow based server where the PMT dashboard is hosted, where you can actually see the data. And the second one is PMT data store, which is Elasticsearch based data store. And this is where we store all the information, whether it is related to PMT or Cold Fusion servers. So this is the most important piece of the system. Once the CF server is configured with PMT, then CF only relies on the data store, and CF never talks to the PMT server directly. Even if PMT server is down, CF will still push all the data to the data store if the data store is still up and running. And PMT server basically talks to the data store for most of the content that is already available in the data store. It sends a request and fetches all the data and renders it onto the PMT dashboard. So now let's talk about PMT installation. There are certain points that we need to keep in mind while installing PMT. I'll not actually install the PMT. What I have done is I have taken most important installer screens and I'll walk you guys through with those screens. So this is the screen that you get after accepting EULA, which talks about the PMT components that we discussed earlier. So you can install both the components on the same machine, or you can choose to install only PMT server on one machine, let's say, and you can install the data store on a separate machine. So that is something that you can decide according to the CF server deployment that you guys have in your organization, or the type of machine that you are actually using to install the PMT. The next screen is dashboard configuration. Default IP is localhost. You can change it to the public IP so that you can access PMT dashboard from other machines as well, because you would want to install it on one machine, but you would want to see the dashboard from any machine, because there can be multiple developers or system admins who would want to actually monitor the health of the system. But let's say you have installed it with localhost or loopback IP address, then what we can do? I'll show you how we can change this configuration post installation that I'll discuss. Now comes the data store configuration. So if you are installing the data store along with the PMT server, like the screen that I have shown you earlier, if you have selected both the components, then you need to provide the host name or IP of the machine where you are actually installing the PMT server. There is one more, like one important point that we need to actually keep in mind. It does not allow you to use localhost or loopback IP address, because let's say if Cold Fusion is installed on a different machine and Cold Fusion talks to the data store, and if you have installed a data store with the loopback IP address, in that case CF will not be able to talk to the data store. So just to avoid that kind of confusion, we have actually restricted this particular value, like you cannot key in localhost or loopback IP address from the installer. Now comes the data store, this particular screen, which is exactly the same as the previous screen, but this screen has a little bit of different purpose. Let's say you have not selected the data store on this that install component screen. In that case, what will happen? This screen will act as a configuration wizard for the remote data store configuration. So in this, what you need to do is you need to enter the IP address of the remote machine where you have already installed the data store and the port of that particular data store. So this screen will not actually install the data store. It will just help you in communicating with the already existing data store. So these are the three important screens that we should focus on while installing PMT. So now, since the PMT installation is over, we can move on to the PMT configuration. So first I'll discuss about PMT server configuration files. So PMT configuration files are actually located in the PMT installation root directory, and there is a folder called config where you can find all the configuration files related to PMT server. So as I told you, there are two components. So first we'll talk about the PMT server configurations, and then we'll talk about the data store configurations. So there are two important files that we have for PMT. The first one is application.properties. So it has a few properties, and this is the file that I was talking about. So when you install PMT, all the inputs that you passed in the installer, those inputs are actually stored in this particular file. So the very first property that we have is a PMT ID. So this is a sort of unique identification number that we generate for PMT, so that data store knows which PMT is actually configured with this data store. So if, let's say, there is another PMT server that is trying to communicate to the same data store, it will not allow that. Then we have perfmon toolset.host and HTTP port. So these are the properties that you can use to change the host name for the PMT dashboard that I was talking about earlier. So currently it is, let's say, loopback IP address. You can change it to the public IP, and you can also change the port number if you want. Then third is the data store host and port. So these are the properties that are used to actually connect to the data store. You can change the host name of the data store wherever it is installed and the port number from this file, so that PMT can talk to the data store. Then we have these two properties. These are rarely used. One is the shutdown port, which is 9505 by default, and this port is used to shut down the PMT service. And then we have a session timeout, which is 60 minutes by default. You can change if you want. Then there is one more property in the file which is called perfmon toolset.ip, and the default value for this IP is 127.0.0.1, which is the loopback IP address. So basically we use this particular IP to bind with the shutdown port. Why we do that is so that the shutdown port is only accessible from the same machine, and like we should not use it, and we are also planning to remove it from the future releases so that because I've seen that people get confused sometimes that which property to use, whether I should use perfmontoolset.ip or perfmontoolset.host. So we will be removing this property going forward. Then the second configuration file is jvm.config, and this is the file that you can use to change the configurations for JVM. The first property is java.home that you can use to change the JRE for PMT. Let's say there is a new version of JDK that is available and you want to change that. You can change it in java.home. Then we have java.args. Here you can change the Java arguments, like if you want to change the max meta space or heap size or any JVM argument. But these are the settings that may not be required. Like you need not to change anything because by default everything is already set. Then we have a few properties for the class path. Now let me move on to the data store configuration. So this is the location for data store configuration. So PMT install root, then data store, and then there is a folder called config. So data store also has two important files. The very first is elasticsearch.yml. So this file is actually used to make configuration changes related to the data store itself. So primarily I'll be talking about three sections. Like there are a lot of properties that you can change for Elasticsearch, but I'll be touching upon only three sections. So the very first is the network. So here we have like network.host. So this is the value that we have actually entered in the installer when we actually installed the data store. So let's say after installation, if you want to change the host name, or if you have inserted the IP address or you want to change it for whatever reason, you can come to this file and change the host name. But if you are doing so, then you have to ensure that the same configuration file is communicated back to other servers as well. Like the same value should be available in application.properties as well. And then we have HTTP port on which your data store is available. And then we have third property, which is transport.tcp.port. This is 9350. Basically, this particular port is only used for node-to-node communication. So this port is only required if you are actually using Elasticsearch cluster. If you do not have a cluster, then this might not be used. Second section is paths. So this is also an important section. By default, generally we have two properties that we can use. One is path.data, which is the location where Elasticsearch stores the data. So we don't change it because we already have a data folder that is inside the data store folder. And logs is also inside the data store folder itself. So generally we do not change it. But there is a third property called path.repo. So basically this property is used to configure the repository for data store. Let's say you are actually monitoring a lot of CF servers and a lot of data is being collected, right? So what you do not want to actually delete that data, but you want to archive that information. So what you can do, you can configure a repository and then you can instruct PMT to actually take a snapshots, like snapshots for the existing data, so that it does not delete that information. It will just archive it, and let's say in future if you need that data back, you can also restore it. Then the third section is discovery. So this is also the section that is required only if you are configuring the Elasticsearch cluster. Otherwise, we may not need to use this particular configuration file. So it is pretty simple. Like what you can do is you can just install the data store on a different machine and you can configure the IP address of that machine. You can see that here we have one property called discovery.zen.ping.unicast.host. Here you need to specify the IP address of that machine where you are actually installing the data store. And as I told you on the previous screen that 9350 is the port that is used for node-to-node communication. If all the nodes are actually configured with 9350, then you need not to specify the port. But let's say you are not using the default port. In that case, you have to specify it like this: host 1 colon and then the port. Let's say 9351. Only then they'll be able to communicate to each other. So this was the Elasticsearch YML configuration. Now let's move to the second configuration file that is important is JVM config. So basically, Elasticsearch has two different ways of configuring the JVM settings. One is the jvm.options file that is available inside the same directory. But this file is only used if you are running data store either using a command prompt or on a non-Windows platform. Otherwise, it will not pick those changes. So this is the location for this file. And second, let's say if you are running PMT on Windows and you are running data store service through the services.msc. So in that case, if you want to change the JVM configuration, you need to make use of this particular batch file, which is elasticsearch-service.bat, and the parameter that you need to pass is manager. Once you do that, and this file is actually located inside data store bin. It's not in the config folder. So once you execute this command, you'll see a screen like this, and then you can navigate to the Java tab, and you can see the initial memory pool that I have set to 512 MB, and maximum pool is also 512. So I have seen that people complain that by default when they install PMT on a server, by default it takes actually a lot of memory. It goes almost up to 2.5 GB, which is about, like, I think 2.2 GB is for Elasticsearch, which is the data store, and approximately around 300 MB for the PMT server. So we actually configured the default value for PMT for the production server so that you can actually maintain good amount of data without making any configuration changes. But let's say if you are installing PMT on a developer machine where you do not want to consume that much of memory, you can come to this particular dialog box and you can reduce the memory consumption for Elasticsearch. All right, so this is done. Now let's see how we can onboard ColdFusion servers onto the PMT. But before I get into onboarding, I want to discuss about the ColdFusion configuration, because that is also, that is equally important, that ColdFusion is also configured properly. Otherwise, you might face few issues. And once after discussing the ColdFusion configuration, I'll talk about how we can onboard ColdFusion servers. There are basically two ways you can do it. One is automatic, which is auto discovery, and second is the manual configuration. So let's move on to the ColdFusion configuration. So this is the page that we have added as part of ColdFusion 2018, which is performance monitoring toolset. So the very first property that you can see, which is highlighted, which is ColdFusion hostname. This hostname should be correct, because sometimes it happens that people actually do not use the correct hostname. Let's say if hostname needs a proper domain name along with it, right? So you have to use the domain name as well, because otherwise what will happen when PMT is configured with CF, CF sends this host name to the PMT server, and then PMT tries to talk to CF. So if there is some problem with this particular host name, then PMT will not be able to talk to CF. So we need to ensure this host name is configured correctly. Second is monitoring shared secret. So this is the property that is used to just establish a trust between PMT and CF so that we know that the request is coming from a Cold Fusion server. So you can toggle on that button to see the secret. And if you are using auto discovery, you need not to worry about it. But let's say if you are configuring CF server manually for whatever reason, you have to come to the Cold Fusion administrator page and copy this secret and paste it in the PMT dashboard. I'll show you how we can do that. And then we have the connected to data store and monitoring enabled. So as you can see, currently this CF server is not configured with PMT. That is why it is showing those cross icons. Now, once let's say this particular CF server is configured with PMT, then you will see something like this. It will show you that it is connected to data store and monitoring is also enabled. And there will be one more property, which is the dashboard link, so that you can directly launch the PMT dashboard from the CF server itself. So this was about CF server. Now let's move on to the PMT part. So when we install PMT, the very first screen that comes is this particular screen where we see auto discovery. So either you can choose to click on start auto discovery or you can click on skip. So once you click on auto discovery, what happens? Like PMT will actually start searching all the ColdFusion 2018 nodes that are installed on the network. But that can happen only if the multicasting is enabled on the network. If multicasting is not enabled, in that case, like PMT will not be able to search any CF server. So if the multicasting is enabled and it is working, then it will identify all the ColdFusion 2018 servers that are running on the network. So this screen you will see where it is actually trying to collect the list of all the CF servers. And once we have the list, it will show a dialog box like this where you can see the list of all the nodes. You can select the node which you want to configure. Here we have one toggle button that you can just click on that toggle button, and once you do that, it will turn in green. And you can also select all the CF servers. Let's say you want to configure all the CF servers, you can just click on enable all, and then you can click on proceed once that is done. Once you do that, you will get this success message for all the CF servers that you might have configured. So that was the flow for auto discovery, and the second flow is for manual configuration. Let's say auto discovery is not working or you want to configure it manually because that CF server is not part of the same network. So what you can do is you can click on skip, and then you'll get one this page where there's a button which is add server. You can click on add server. Once you do that, you will get a form like this where you can mention server name. This has to be proper server name so that PMT can communicate to the CF server. Then the port of the CF server, and if it's a G2E server, you need to specify the G2E context name. And then we have this monitoring shared secret. So in this case, like if you are doing it manually, you have to go to that ColdFusion server and copy the shared secret from there and then paste it in this field. And the last option is HTTPS server. Let's say your CF is running over HTTPS, then you have to enable this so that it can establish the connection over SSL. Once you do that, You will again see the same screen that we have seen earlier. And after this, you can click on proceed so that it can configure the CF server. So these were the two flows where you can actually configure the CF server. So now I'll show you how actually these components talk to each other when whether it is through auto discovery or when we are configuring it manually. So these are the two components that we discussed. One is Cold Fusion server, and then we have our PMT server. So if you are whether you are doing it through auto discovery or manual, the communication can start from both the end. Like whenever CF server comes up on the network, it will automatically propagate the information that I am available, and it will send the packet. And if PMT is available at that point of time, it will identify that there is a new node that is available now on the network, and it will show you that in the available server list. And if it is manual, then you have to configure everything from the PMT server and then submit it. Once you submit, what will happen? PMT will actually send the data store details to CF server. So in order to do that, PMT server should have the information like the IP address of CF server, and that has to be correct. So once the data store details are there with CF server, then it will start communicating with the data store. After that, CF will never talk to PMT directly. So CF will push all the configurations to the data store, like what kind of machine that it is running on, what is the CPU usage, memory configuration, everything. It will push it to the data store. And it will also start pushing the monitoring data to CF. So that is how the communication happens when we are trying to configure the CF server with PMT. So we need to keep this thing in mind, the IP address and the port. These are very important when we are configuring, and we need to ensure that these ports are not blocked through a firewall. So if it is the case, then these two components will not be able to talk to each other. So we need to ensure that whatever IP and port for PMT server or Elasticsearch, you should be able to access those IP and port from the CF machine, and the IP address and port for CF should be accessible from the PMT machine and the data store machine. So if let's say it is not working, what you can do is you can try to do a telnet for that IP and port and see whether the connection is actually going through or not. So that was the communication part. Now let's see how we actually collect the matrix. So as we know that PMT also collects the data related to the connector. So let me show you. So here are the four components that we have. The very first is web server, like it can be your IIS or Apache, HTTPD server, then Cold Fusion, and then PMT server. And the last component is the data store. So let's say request comes through a client to a web server, and then web server will send the request to the Cold Fusion. So we collect a lot of information about connector, and we also have a auto connector tuning functionality. If CF is configured with PMT, so what happens? We keep on monitoring the connection usage for your connector, and let's say there is a high load on your connector, then we automatically tune your connection pool according to the need or according to the configurations that you have set in the PMT dashboard. So once that information is sent to the CF server, this CF will actually push the request information, whether it is related to connector or any request data. It can be, let's say some request comes, whether it contains information about database or any tag. So it will push that request data to the data store. Then second type of data that we send is non-request data. So that is the data that we collect at an interval of 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds we collect data. Non-request data is like system matrix, JVM matrix, whether the system is up or not. Like CF also sends a heartbeat to data store every second just to send the information that CF server is up or not. So you can also configure whether if the server is not available, you might get a notification that this server went down. And then PMT also talk to CF, that is only for certain settings. One is active monitoring. Let's say you want to see how many requests are currently getting served by CF. You can go to the PMT dashboard and there is a section called active monitoring. And only in that case, PMT will make a call to CF directly. And two other options are like, let's say if you want to trigger a thread dump or a heap dump, or you want to trigger a GC, PMT will send a request to CF, and then CF will push that information directly to the data store. So this is how we actually collect the information, and this is how these components actually talk to each other. So you can see that like CF will never talk to PMT directly. It will always push the information to the data store, and PMT can read that information from the data store. And let's say if you are changing something from the data store, like from the PMT dashboard, so that information will be pushed to Elasticsearch, and CF will read that information from the Elasticsearch. So let's say if PMT server is not available, but the data store is still available, so CF will still push all the information to data store, and whenever PMT server comes up, it can still read all that information without any issue. Now we'll see how we can configure data archiving. Basically, data archiving is only required if you are collecting a lot of data. We have customers like who have configured 60, 80 CF servers, and they are getting like millions of requests per day, and they have only one PMT server with single Elasticsearch. So obviously it cannot scale because the amount of data that we are actually storing in PMT is huge, right? So it becomes important to manage the data. So currently PMT has a functionality to archive the data. So you can archive the data and then you can delete it, right? So I'll show you how we can do data archiving so that you can push that data to archive and delete it if it is not required. So the way it works is like in order to configure data archiving, you have to first create a repository. And once the repository is created and configured with the PMT, you can either archive data manually or you can do it automatically. Like you can configure a scheduler that you want to maintain data only for, let's say, 5 days. So it will keep on archiving data which is greater than 5 days. So this is a form where you can create a repository, but there is one prerequisite. What you have to do is if you want to configure a repository, you have to configure one property in Elasticsearch YML file that I have shown you earlier when I was talking about elasticsearch.yml. There is a property called path.repo that you have to specify in elasticsearch.yml and restart it manually. And only after that you can create the repository. Otherwise, it will not work. So that's a catch. So I'll show you how we can create a repository in a demo. So once the repository is configured, then we have this auto archiving option that I was talking about. You can just enable it and then select the repository where you want to store the data. And you can say that archive data that is older than, let's say, 5 days. So it will start archiving that data, and you can also see the frequency, whether you want to run it daily, you want to run it twice a day, or not twice a day, let's say alternative day. So you can configure that as well. So let me just show you how we can create the archive. So guys, can you see the screen? Hello. All right. So this is the configuration file, which is elasticsearch.yml that I was talking about. So as you can see, I have one property set, and the repository that I am using is inside the same folder. So I have already configured it and restarted Elasticsearch. I will not be doing it again. So let me go to the PMT dashboard. So the server is already configured. You can go to the settings page, and the last option that is available under servers section is archiving. Once you go there, under settings tab, there is a section called repositories. You can click on repository, and let's say I want to create a repo 1, and this is the location that I have configured it with. I'll create the repository, and repository is created, and you can see the type is file system. You can also use a network drive to create a repository if you want. So now there are two options. Once the repository is created, you can directly go to the archives page and click on take a snapshot icon. You can say, let's say snapshot 1, and you can select the repo where you want to take it. Start date, let's say I want to archive data from 24th to, let's say, 28th of July. I'll click on archive. It will start archiving that data. It is in progress. Once the data is archived, it will notify me using this notification. It is still in archiving mode. Yeah, so as you can see, the status is success now, and the data has been archived. So now there are two options that are available. One is restore. If you want to restore that data will again come back, and if you want to delete it, you can directly delete that. Let me show it to you. Like if I am going to CF server, so the data that is available is only for 29th and 30th of July, because I have archived the data that was available for 28th or 27th of July. Let me try to restore that data, and you can also see the indexes that are available in Elasticsearch. This is only for 30th July and 29th of July, right? So let me try to restore it. Once I click on restore, it will ask for the confirmation, and restore is triggered now. Let me check whether it is restore. It is in the process of restoring. So I had actually only two indexes. One is for 27th and 28th. So that data has been restored. We can go back to CF server page and see whether the data is available. So data was not much. There were like only couple of requests that I had. You can see that data came back because earlier the data was not available for 28th, right? So similarly, you can also delete it because if you have a crunch that you cannot store a lot of information on a machine, or and anyway, like if you do not want to store data for, let's say, for more than 5 days, because that's a monitoring data only, right? And we are also coming up with a new feature for 2018 itself, because now we have realized that a lot of customers are actually raising, like they have a concern that a lot of data is getting generated. So instead of having only archiving option and then you delete it, we are directly coming up with the delete option where you can just configure the scheduler for delete. You can say that delete the data for whatever data that is older than, let's say, 3 days. So you need not to worry about that information. It will take care of all the data on its own. The only catch is that you may not be able to restore that data. So that was the manual part, and I can also do a auto archiving. Let's say I can say enable, and I can select the repository. I want to maintain data, archive data that is older than, let's say, 2 days. And if I click on submit, that archiving settings have been saved successfully. Let me see. Yeah, so snapshot is created. Let me check if the data has been archived or not. All right, so now you can see the data is gone only for 26th of July, not for 29th and 28th. So why we actually maintained data for, like you can see the index is are available for 3 days, right? So we do not consider the current day because anyway you are collecting data, right? So we do not allow users to archive the data for the same day. So that is why when I said that I want to maintain data for last 2 days, so it's not inclusive of the current date. All right, so it will be like 30th is the current date, and then it will store the like archived, maintain the data for last 2 days. So that was the archiving feature. Now let me move back to the presentation. So now I'll talk about the common customer reported issues that we generally get to our support team. The very first is high memory consumption that I already discussed. Like by default, it consumes data that is like memory approximately around 2.5 GB. But let's say that is not the consumption that you want and the usage is not high for you, then you can directly go to the options or that manager that I have shown you, and you can reduce the memory consumption for the PMT from there. Because you're saying that you do not want to use that much of memory, so you can say 512 MB. So it will not use more memory. So that like you can solve that problem using this. Second is high CPU consumption as a data store that Elasticsearch data store that we are using. We it actually like we are ingesting a lot of data from CF to PMT, like to the data store directly, and then data store is also actually indexing all that data in real time so that it is available for searching. So that is why you might see a little bit of CPU consumption that is high. We are also trying to expose few properties that are already available in configuration files. So you can say, let's say you do not want instant search, like you do not want whatever data is going to the data store, it should not be searchable instantly, right? So you can delay it so that there is not high CPU consumption on the server. You can say, because currently it is by default it is 1 second. So you can say, let's say you can change it to 10 seconds. So you'll see the lag of 10 seconds. So that data will not be real in real time that you'll be seeing in the dashboard. Then the third issue is auto discovery issue. So generally this issue only comes where we see that people report issues like they have clicked on auto discovery, but they are not able to identify the CF server, even though the CF server is installed on the same machine. So it's not about whether the CF and PMT is installed on the same machine or not. We need to see whether the multicasting is enabled on the system or not. If that is enabled, then PMT will be able to identify it, because the communication that happens, that is over the multicast socket, and if the communication is not happening, then it may not work. So we need to see whether multicasting is enabled on the network. Then the fourth issue is like PMT is configured, but monitoring data is not getting captured. So this kind of issue can happen if CF is not able to talk to the Elasticsearch. So let's say you have sent the IP address or the host of the data store to CF, but for whatever reason, CF is not able to talk to that data store. Let's say port is blocked by the firewall, or you have not actually specified the domain name, and these two servers are on two different domains. So like CF server will not be able to search the data store. So we need to ensure that the server is actually, like CF server can actually talk to the data store server. So that was the fourth issue. And then the fifth issue is CF server is pushing data to PMT, but PMT is showing CF server is not available. Sometimes it happens that it will show CF server is down. What happens if, let's say, CF and PMT both are stored like installed on two different machines, and there is a time difference in these two machines? Because the mechanism that we use to identify whether the CF server is up or not is the heartbeat. So we check whether we got the heartbeat in last like a minute or not, right? And if there is a difference of, let's say, 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the time that we have for these two servers, then there will be a difference of 10 minutes always. So a data store will always think that I have not received the heartbeat in last 10 minutes. That means that CF server is down. So we need to ensure that the time, like the clocks are in sync wherever PMT and CF servers are installed. So, and the last issue is the high disk consumption, like high disk space consumption. So by default, it does not store like consume lot of space, but yes, if you have lot of CF servers that are configured with a single PMT server and it only has one data store, in that case you might see that a lot of data is getting generated. So we have to configure it properly so that you don't see a lot of disk space consumption. So currently we have that archiving option. You need to ensure that you enable, like configure the archiving and delete the data, whatever is not required. And we are already working on an update for PMT 2018, where we'll be adding that functionality that you can delete this data automatically using a scheduler. So these were the issues that I wanted to discuss. So what we have covered, we have discussed about PMT components, then PMT installation. We have also talked about configuration files. We have also seen how we can onboard Cold Fusion servers to PMT, then how the communication happens between these components, and how the data is actually captured in the system. Then we have also seen how we can archive the data. And last, we have also discussed about the common reported issues by our customers. Now, one last thing that I want to share, like this is the resource that you guys can use, like download link from where you can download the PMT server. And then we have introduction and overview page. It is kind of getting started for PMT. Then we also have a installation guide for PMT. So I would recommend you guys to go through with the installation guide and deployment guide where we have a recommendation for the PMT server, like the kind of deployment you have. According to that, you can install it. And the beauty is like you need not to install PMT on each and every server where you have CF, right? So you can have one dedicated machine where it can monitor all your CF servers. But the thing is, if you have not configured it properly and you have configured, let's say, 100 servers, and the server does not have that kind of capacity, right? Then it's a natural, like you might face few performance issues from the PMT side. But if it is configured properly, then you will not see any issue with at least as far as the performance is concerned, because we have seen customers like who have 60, 80 CF servers that are configured with single PMT, and they are actually getting like millions of requests per day, and PMT is working well. The only challenge that these guys are facing is the data that is getting generated is approximately around like 10, 20 GB per day, right? So that is the kind of problem that they are facing, and we are coming up with a solution for that. Once we have that auto deletion mechanism, then it will not be a problem going forward. And the last part is help. Let's say if you're still facing an issue, you can always write to cfinstall at adobe.com, and you can also send an email to me. I can also directly reply to you guys if you are facing any issue. My email address is nimsharm at adobe.com. So that was it from my side. If you guys have any question, you can ask. I'll be happy to answer your questions. So, Jose, we are actually working with few customers for the testimonials and the use case or a case study rather uh, to come up with those details. So we will be sharing those cases studies in the coming months. Yeah, Charlie. So we'll be sharing the recording. I think the plan was that we'll be sharing recordings for both the sessions together. So yes, we'll be sharing it. Yeah, so we have a deployment guide. Let me just show it to you if you guys have couple of minutes. Let me just open it and show it. That will be easier basically. So this is the deployment guide that we came up with, and we also have the sizing information, what kind of data like that you can collect. Let's say here we have that information. Suppose you have like request. This is the column that we have for the number of requests that you are getting per CF node per day. So if you are getting, let's say, 10K request per day, so and you only have one CF server, then you will be generating approximately around 110 MB of data. But it depends on the request as well, like what is the kind of data that you are actually capturing. So we have done it for a sample request, and that is the data that got generated. But let's say if you are using a lot of functions, lot of queries in a same request itself, then this data might increase. Similarly, like if you have like 50,000 requests per day and 100,000 requests per day, then we have like 1 million requests per day. So we have that kind of data. So you can actually uh, do some sort of benchmarking for your site and see the kind of load that you are actually observing on your servers. And according to that, you can take a call. But yes, uh, data like Elasticsearch is little bit of resource intensive. So I like we would recommend that if you can install it on a separate machine, that that basically that is the recommendations that we have, that we should always install PMT on a separate machine so that it does not impact the performance of your production server. And this too, like this document also has information about how you can archive the data. Then we have how you can like configure the Elasticsearch settings to get a better performance, operating system related tuning that you can do to get a better performance out of PMT. Then we have information about how you can configure an Elasticsearch cluster. Let's say if you do not have an like high-end machine, so what you can do is you can use two or three CF servers, and like not CF servers, like three VMs, and you can install Elasticsearch there. Like if you have a very big setup with hundreds of CF servers, then you can go for Elasticsearch cluster as well. Then the last section that we have is how you can configure the heap size for Elasticsearch. This section has for both like for Windows and Linux as well. I hope it answers your question. Right. So yeah, I can talk about that. Yeah, basically the index size is like the we basically generate the like create an index on a daily basis. So you can see this is a request that I have sent to the Elasticsearch directly to identify how many indexes are there. So you can see this is an index for let's say 20th, 29th of July, then 30th of July. And you can also see the size of the document like this index here. So this is approximately around 145 KB. And if you see this index, this is around 3.5 MB. And yes, one more thing I forgot to mention. By default, the Elasticsearch, like the PMT that we have, it has a setting that is enabled, which is replica. So it also creates a replica for the same index. So let's say there is an index that we are generating for 30th of July, and you have like millions of requests, and it is creating an index of approximately around let's say 800 MB. So we are also creating a 800 MB of replica. So what we are planning to do is we are planning to make it configurable, and we will not create the replica by default, so that the like disk space consumption is less by default. And if someone wants to maintain a replica, they can go and configure it by like manually. So it will further reduce the disk space consumption. Yeah, so Charlie, we can take your feedback, and we'll ensure that the document is updated with that information. Okay, I think you have a question on Docker image as well. I didn't get the question though. Right, okay, all right. So I got your point. So yeah, that's true. So we have a Docker image also for PNT. So we can also make use of Docker image. So is there any other question, guys? Thanks, guys. So if there is no other question, we can wrap up the session. Thanks a lot, and you have a good rest of the day. Bye bye.